my patents are certainly used in the intuitive robot, but I really, much more. There's other technology as well that drove what they're wanting to do, but basically, the goal here is to make it seem to the surgeon that he or she is inside the patient. So you have a stereo laparoscope that you can observe the inside of the patient. You have two little wristed instruments and two control handles. If I move them around, everything is lined up so it feels to the surgeon like the surgeon's hands are these wristed instruments. But if we think about this, what we've really done is we put a computer between the surgeon and the surgeon's tools and the patients. So this raw paradigm, all of the information is in the surgeon's head. But the fact is we have I should just mention there's another way that I can tell the robot what to do. Here, rather than move a control handle, we have another paradigm that works a little bit like power steering in a car. If the robot holds the tool and the surgeon holds the tool and pulls on the tool, the robot feels the force and just follows the surgeon's hand. So I call this steady hand manipulation because it's a robot doing the motion. It doesn't have any hand tremor. Also, it's a robot. It doesn't have to follow the surgeon's hand. It can enforce a safety barrier. Don't put that knife onto that blood vessel. And also, it can help guide a tool along the path. It can even take over and do some step autonomously with its own sensor feedback that it may be able to do better that little step than an unaided human can do. So the paradigm as it's emerging is however I'm telling the robot what I want it to do, let's take advantage of the fact that we have a computer there that can integrate much more information and have many ways to give that information to the surgeon and also use that information in other ways to help control the process. So if we do this, one thing that's very, very important, we have again this partnership. The machine, or really the computer controlling the machine, and the surgeon need to have some shared situational awareness. They both need to understand what the task is, what the anatomy is, what's going on right now. And my current belief, a lot of when you see these machine learning things, that awareness is not very transparent because it's embedded in a bunch of billion parameters in some neural network. But to me, the way to think about this is as a simulation of the patient and the task and the environment that is moving at the same time that you're doing the procedure and can be updated by what the sensors in the operating room are telling you. If you think about it, we don't actually see what's on our retinas. We see a simulation assembled in our brain. And that's a bad analogy, but it, I think, carries maybe the point. So here's another picture of that, where, again, I apologize for kind of those wonky computer science pictures, but I'm a computer scientist, so what can I do? And it really, for me, a lot really rides on this concurrent digital twin embodiment of that enables a shared understanding of what the task is and the environment is that can be kept up to date and can be used to help control the machine. I'd like to talk about a few examples of this, starting with some recent work over the last 5 or so years that I've been doing in ENT surgery, primarily endoscopic, well, various procedures. And let me start with a very simple hand-over-hand control for laryngeal surgery, where the goal really is you're operating very long instruments and the robot can have no hand tremor. One of the things that the vocal cord surgeon told me is really worried about is he's retracting some tissue, and a spasm could tear the vocal cord, and suddenly you've got an even bigger problem than a polyp. So that's the kind of thing that you can do here. This is a surgical resident in our mock operating room, operating on a pig larynx, um, such as this. And this is what it looks like with here, just showing us we're tracking the surgical tools. And here is the comparison of the motions of the surgical tools with and without, with on the right and without on the left, surgical, the robot manipulating the tool. And here is other things that basically show the frequency of motion. And what this is showing is that the motion is got less tremor and is basically smoother and more deliberate, which is what you want to see. I should just mention that this particular robot was commercialized by a small company called Galen Robotics, who got FDA de novo clearance on the for the laryngeal application before they ran out of money, and now they're looking to be revived with additional investment. I want to talk a bit more about some of the research I've been doing, motivated by lateral skull-based surgery, things like for cochlear implants or things on the mastoid, or getting access for acoustic neuromas, where the challenge is you're operating, you have to remove bone from the hardest bone in your body and clean things out, but you have to get within, often within a millimeter of very delicate structures, such if you damage the facial nerve, as an example, you've paralyzed half the patient's face. So that's not something you want to have happen. And the procedures can be very, very challenging. So what we've been investigating is here is the robot where we're holding a, this is Dr. Galaya, who's one of our attending surgeons, manipulating the robot with this hand over hand way. And we have one force sensor here for feeling how she's pulling, and another one kind of embedded in here, so we know how hard the robot tool is touching the tissue. We also, though, again, it's a system concept where another part is we want to take surgical video, stereo video from a microscope, do some computer vision to get a point cloud of 3D points that are on the visible anatomy. And then you can register all of that information back to patient CT. So now we know what we're seeing through the microscope, how that corresponds to the patient anatomy. And through other steps, we can also relate it to how the surgical tools are moving. But if you think about it, if you do a delicate task, you're using your vision, but you're using your vision to help you control tool to tissue relationships. You're not closing your eyes and doing this. So again, concurrent simulator. We had also developed a very good surgical simulator. This is a little earlier version of it for training residents in neurotology. We also have a version of this for spine and one for sinus surgery. And what we can use this for is both for training, but we get an awful lot of data that we can use to help us do our machine learning and to relate back to real surgical video as well. Here's some examples. In this case, we're using basically an optical tracking system just to track the motion of the tool. This is Dr. Creighton, who has been he was a fellow and is now an attending surgeon with us, and has been a terrific collaborator. Um, and this shows a little better. Here, you're seeing some of the vision at the bottom, and we're updating the model. And then here, there's an overlay of the student did it backwards. There's here red saying, please get rid of this tissue. That should have been green. And then there should have been red say, please don't get rid of that tissue. And I kind of fussed at them, but we've never gotten the video fixed. But you can kind of see the idea. Well, okay, I mentioned motion. One of the other challenges is, can we implement a safety barrier to help us protect the delicate anatomy? And once we've registered all our coordinate systems together, we know how far away the drill is from any piece of anatomy. And also, as we remove tissue, we can update our CT model so that we know every time you think you've removed some volume element, you just erase it from the CT scan. And so here, we haven't done this, we've done this on only cadavers, but here is a digital twin. And so that's what the registered CT looks like. And you can see some of the structures there. And now what we want to do is we can help guide a tool along a path. You kind of push and it'll steer itself, or you can just move it. But as well, we can basically put a safety barrier. It says, if I start getting too close to something I don't want to touch, it should get harder and harder and harder to go there. And finally, if I get to some safety limit, it won't let me go any further. And so if we do that, again, there's an online simulation. These arrows correspond to some of the forces that the surgeon is exerting and what the tool is feeling. And on the right here, this is part of a longer video where there's water in there, but the robot still knows where the delicate structure is. Now, in fact, I think if you had that much obscuring, you'd wait till you suctioned it out. But there are cases where you really can't quite see what you want to, but the robot still knows where it is. So how's that work? Okay, here, the yellow is the segmented facial nerve. This was the anatomy before we machined things. This is after we machined things. And this actually got a little closer than I'm comfortable with, but in a number of trials, we were always able to protect that delicate structure. Well, wait a moment. What I want to have is, again, a partner. The robot or the machine should be some kind of a partner to the surgeon. And if I have two surgeons working together, how do they communicate? Somewhat by seeing what each other are doing, somewhat by a shared understanding of what's going on, but also they talk to each other. And they talk to each other not often in terms of, hey, move left 2 millimeters, but in could you please aim the endoscope so that it's centered on the optic nerve or something of that nature? And so we're very interested in having semantically meaningful communication between the assistant system and the surgeon. And this is just an undergraduate project starting to put together some of our infrastructure for doing that, where we also have labeled anatomy so that the system knows the names of the anatomic structures it's working with. But here was just a very early experiment where here this is really just communicating to set up. The surgeon is basically telling the robot what the names of some tools are. But going on from this, you can say, hey, please go on to the next lamella and things like that. We're also very interested in sinus surgery. where here, this is Dr. Ishii, who I've worked with for probably 28 years on various projects. And again, one of the things here, we're just using the robot as an endoscope holder. You let go, it'll sit there. Uh, and among other things, it would enable him to do two-handed surgery. But where we're going is we want to have a smart assistant where, again, what we can do, we have methods which just from the motion of the camera, we're able to reconstruct uh, using some techniques that are similar to what a car would use to learn a street map, to build up a model of the anatomy and also to update it as we begin to modify it. And then if you can relate that, you can register that online appreciation of the anatomy to preoperative CT. You can label all the structures so you know what you're seeing. And once you've done that, you can use a whole variety of ways to help the surgeon. The same kind of um, uh, safety barriers, intelligent tool, aiming the endoscope. One of the things that we're very interested in here, this is showing, this is Tito Porras, who is a final year resident. He will become a fellow, I hope, with us, um, showing some of the things where we're just showing a surgical navigation system here. But one of the things that Tito is very interested in is pituitary surgery through the nose, transphenoidal surgery. You know all about this. And it's a procedure where when they back in there, they really want to use two instruments. So what the way they work is Massaro works with a neurosurgeon and they trade off roles. The neurosurgeon is the camera holder until you get down to the point where Dr. Ishii becomes the camera holder and they talk to each other. And they've worked together for a long time, so they know, it's practically a married couple, I guess. Uh, but, and what we would like to have is a robot that can enforce all the safety barriers. One of the things is that if the robot is doing the motion, we know how that endoscope has moved very accurately, and we can use that to help us get an even better reconstruction of the anatomy. And then the other part of the research here, and we can use that to provide useful navigational feedback and anatomical feedback to say, hey, what's beyond the surface I'm seeing in the endoscope? And the other thing you can do is you can, want to be sure I don't talk myself out of time, is again, we can have the other part of our goal is to converse with the robot in the same way that you would with the surgeon. And I don't think Dr. Ishii would be too disappointed if, in that case, uh, the neurosurgeon Gary Gallia didn't need him for that. Plus, there are a lot of cases, even in sinus surgery, or it would be more convenient to use two hands, but it's too expensive really to be justified. But if you can do it, there are advantages. I'd like to move on. Here's another application involving, again, what we call a virtual fixture. And here the goal is orthodontic procedure, by sagittal split osteotomy, where you're basically relocating the jaw. And so you're going to cut both sides of the jaw, you're going to shift it forward and backwards, and then use little screw, 50 or $100 sheet metal screws and some little straps to bolt it all back together. And the challenge, of course, is there's structure right there, often quite close to where you're going to cut, that you dare not damage. And you actually need these cuts to be quite straight and parallel where you want them. Otherwise, the procedure gets more difficult. So this is Dr. Yang, who is our surgical craniofacial colleague. Okay, why isn't that playing? Well, maybe it'll be on the next slide. Um, and what we do is we define where we want to make the cuts. The robot will actually move over so it's about where you want to start, still in free space. The robot, he can then guide the robot, but it has a sideways cutter. And what he's able to do with that is the robot will keep that cutter in the plane he wants to make the cut, and also will prevent him from going too deep. So, but you can do that. Well, how well does it work? Well, I think this is a really interesting slide. This is Dr. Yang doing things freehand. This is Dr. Yang with the robot. This is his resident doing things freehand. This is his resident with the robot. This is a medical student doing things freehand and the medical student with the robot. Now, one encouraging thing is if you go freehand from med student to resident to attending, it gets better and better. But none of them equal the robot, and you notice with the robot, they're all the same. And so is there an advantage? And in fact, we did. There's less variation with the robot in freehand, and there's less error. And so this was 12 surgeons, 12 residents, 12 med students. Okay, well now I've made these cuts. Now I have to bolt things together. You're working way back in here, and it's kind of awkward. And so here, what this is some work with collaborators at Chinese University of Hong Kong, where they've developed basically a drill that articulates, and you can set an angle. And then so what you do is we work back in there from the registration, you can get the alignment of that drill you want, and then enforce the drill to stay on that axis as I do the drilling. So this is work in progress. We're hoping to get all of these pieces together, this part of it together sometime for first in human, but there's still a way to go. I can't go without talking about one of some Queen's University work from our current postdoc at Johns Hopkins, who was PhD student for Parvin and Gabor and me on robotically assisted breast cancer surgery. And so here, this was just done on phantoms, but she had ways of helping control the planned resection path. And also, this was some work that we actually started at Johns Hopkins with her to use what's called photoacoustic ultrasound to do tumor bed inspection. Now, here there's also this very, very clever way of basically sniffing the smoke from cautery to see if there are cancer cells there. But here's another technique where we can see basically residual cancer in uncut areas. And there's more work proceeding using some very novel imaging technology that we have at Johns Hopkins that you need 2 weeks of clearance to talk about it, and I didn't get it. But now you hear a lot about autonomous surgery. I'll talk in a moment about my take on this, but I have a colleague, Axel Krieger, and what Axel wants to automate procedures. And so here, one of the things he's been targeting is cholecystectomies. Another is laparoscopic laparoscopic partial nephrectomies, but it's similar set of ideas. Um, and his approach is imitation learning. An expert does a lot of cases. You watch all of those cases. The robot kind of learns the rules and then can do the procedure. Uh, and it is very impressive. Here is an example of uh, basically clipping, and this is all done autonomously. Um, and now you'll see it come over and cut. Then it goes on and does the other side. It's not completely clear to me how simple watching is enough. For one thing, when you taught students, you explained to them as well as showed them. And so I think one of the things we need is including more semantic information about the task. And there's ongoing work with us at Hopkins and elsewhere around the world to try to find more sophisticated ways to connect semantic information to these learn by seeing. I personally, I would like to see something that's more like an animated movie from a textbook. And then somehow from watching, you're able to relate what you're seeing to that animated movie, which is explainable, and then you can use it. The other thing, I personally think that the way this is going to evolve is very gradually. For instance, start with very simple, say, retraction tasks. Don't try to automate what a surgeon already does well. Automate the things that are an annoyance to the surgeon. And gradually you'll get to the point where you can automate other steps. There are other cases where where some automated step can do something better than the surgeon. And I have a couple examples of that. But well, here again, from oh, at least 30 years, we've also been looking at ways to assist in microsurgery. A lot of the motivation for those hand-over-hand robots came from systems like this, where retinal microsurgery, where you're operating on structures that are smaller really than human tremor threshold. You're dealing with forces smaller than human perceptual thresholds. And the stereo vision you get isn't all that great either. Um, so here is an example of using this hand-over-hand robot to do retinal manipulation. Now, one of the things here I haven't shown is there's some force sensors so that you can prevent yourself from accidentally stretching the sclera, which you don't want to do. Also, the digital twin is actually a simulation of what's going on in the retina, where we basically can build a map of the retina and then keep track of things we change. We can also, as you're seeing here, you can superimpose, for instance, information from a preoperative fundus image onto the retina. And you can add various annotations and so forth. Here's another example, a very simple piece of automation that's kind of important if you're using a robot. When you're a lot of retinal surgery involves peeling membranes off of the retina, little scar tissue, where the might be 100 micron thick. It's a little, they say it's a little like peeling tissue paper off wet tissue or sticky tape off wet tissue paper. And they have no force sensation, but they kind of try to judge by changes of appearance when we're about to tear something. we from our own measurements, we've shown that 7 millinewtons will tear the retina, and your perceptual threshold is about 100. But what they'll do is they'll then let go and regrasp and then start again. Well, here what we're doing is we've built force sensors into the surgical tool, and whenever the surgical tool feels too much force, it just lets go on its own. And then the surgeon has a way of telling it to regrasp. And so here, this is without the assistance, and you see that spike there. This is with the assistance, and we're able to preserve, in this case, it's a 7 millinewton threshold. That was on a rabbit retina. I'm not quite sure what a human retina would be, but it's probably not too different. Here's another example where here what we're doing is rather than move an endoscope, we're moving a light source so that you have the brightest illumination always where the surgeon's trying to work. Here's one more example that we've done both here with guidance from optical coherence tomography, which you can sort of think of as ultrasound with light, but it's a little more complicated. But what we're trying to do is to insert a little needle into a blood vessel, a retinal vein that may be 100 microns or smaller in diameter, and inject a drug to dissolve a blood clot. You can't give a systemic drug to unclog a retinal vessel without causing a stroke, which is probably not good. But you have to get the needle in. Going in, you have to not go through the other side of the vessel. And then you have to hold it there for a while. And this is the kind of thing where you really do need some kind of mechanical assistance to do it. And here what we're seeing is that another thing that we're doing is injecting little aliquots of therapeutic agents into particular layers of the retina. And again, using real-time vision techniques to compensate for small motions of the retina due to things like respiration or heartbeat. So these are some of the things that we're doing in this area. Here's one other example. This is a small little snake-like robot that we've developed to go into the eye, and you control both the little gripper and the bend with little thumb control on the tool handle, and then use this hand over hand guiding for the rest, or you can teleoperate the whole thing. This particular robot had about 5 micron precision. There's a newer one that has about 2 micron precision. I mentioned other forms of assistance. This is something for the more the circulator. Here, what we're doing is for the assistant who has to introduce instruments into and out of the abdomen with a Da Vinci or a similar robot. You like to give them some context so they can see what's going on and use that to help them insert a tool or remove a tool where you want it to be. And so this we did actually a few years ago. And the assistant wears one of these head-mounted displays, and so it's an augmented reality display. Now here's a little bit newer version, and you can use this also for help with trocar placement. But here, again, what we're trying to provide is feedback to the assistant who's maybe trying to introduce an instrument or something else to help the surgeon. This is something that is really a device, but I think it's just cool. And I thought I'd mention is typical of some of the other work that we have ongoing. This is a retinal implant that doesn't involve implanting an electrode array in the eye. The problem with electrode arrays is eventually they limit the resolution to what you can build, and then eventually they kind of wear out. Here, the idea is you put a layer of special material into along the line, sort of the inside of the eye, and then you shine a laser dot very fast on pieces that generates basically a photoacoustic signal that then stimulates the underlying retinal nerves. So I think this is just cool. There's a very large NIH award to support it. And it's really led by my colleague Imad Bakhtar, who, along with me, was Gabor and me and another professor were his thesis committee. And Gabor, I guess, was the lead person on that. Well, again, going beyond the operating room, I wish I had time to talk more. One of the things on the right here is a system that we've built. It's really an automation system for extracting salivary glands from mosquitoes as part of a process for building malaria vaccine. And it was really fun. It's a very challenging application, but it also let me get back to some of my earlier automation days at IBM. Here's another project that we actually started thinking about and doing a few things during COVID, but robots for the operating room. And one of the things, I think there's a lot of potential for robots in other parts of the hospital other than just simply sort of the direct surgical intervention. And in care rooms, especially if you in the future have a contaminated care room, you need to get in and out of there without spending 40 minutes taking on and taking off a bunch of protective gear for 5 minutes in the room. And robot will not get sick, and but there's a lot else it can do. So here the idea is you have a robot, can be on wheels with a couple arms, and a toolkit, including things like a camera it can pick up and do some local inspection. Now, there is a challenge with this, that if you want to have these available when the next crisis comes, they've got to be there. You go into the crisis with what you have, not what you wish you had. And you're not going to build a bunch of stuff and put it in a warehouse. So these systems need an economically justified role now. And so this is one of the things that we're exploring. One other thing that we're exploring, I don't really have slides for here, is I said earlier, in a way, the robot isn't just the robot, it's the room. So we have a major effort at Hopkins to make every operation room, in fact, every care room situationally aware, so that the computer system has all of the signals, the video and so forth, and can tell you everything that's going on in that room. And again, what we need, and there's an initial deployment into like 9 ORs at one of the satellite hospitals, and some going into another. But the key thing there is you have to justify it economically. There has to be enough use cases so that the investment of equipping the rooms with the basic infrastructure pays off. And so as that's going in, we're also then developing the data standards and the curation and the architecture to begin to use it for more sophisticated applications, workflow analysis and things like that. Well, I'm almost out of time, so let's come back to this key issue. And what is the research, and where are we still needing to solve problems? And it's basically everywhere. Human computer interaction and intention interpretation. Remember, I need to understand what you're telling me. The computer need to understand what you, the surgeon, are telling me. And in a way, I have to also understand your mental state and your expectations. but there is a lot of work that needs to be done there. Um, Verification, be sure that we're understanding how do I share control of a piece of equipment with the surgeon. And all of these are hard research problems. And grad students in the audience here, welcome. You've got a lot of opportunities here. You also have opportunities here. You need the technology itself to be robust and very reliable and not break and not run amok. Uh, you need to be able to, again, represent the environment. One of the things that's really important is the machine needs to know when what it doesn't know. These machine learning systems really still need to develop a better sense of humility. They need to know what they don't know and recognize when they're in a situation where their experience is not adequate and maybe then need to rely more on the surgeon to tell them what to do. Um, when you get into an error state, you need to be able to recover from that safely. Again, how do I share control? There are a lot of these issues between the human and the machine are in common. And finally, of course, information. One of the things that I think we need to do more of is to look at the entire treatment process, from initial encounter to diagnosis, admission, treatment planning, the procedure itself, recovery, follow up. I think we need to do a better job in all of our information systems and our AI systems to help with the management of that entire process and understand how things interact. We again need to be able to model the patient state and fuse all of this information. We need better ways. These are where the machine learning things come in. I've seen a lot of patients. I need to be able to extract from that to what I know about patients in general, and then have a way of applying it again to a specific patient. Uh, us engineers, we're good at measuring technical endpoints. Measuring clinical outcomes is much more nebulous. And I think one of the challenges that really we need is to find better ways of relate what we did in the operating room, how we modified the patient, and how does that affect long-term outcome. Short-term outcomes, well, there are things you can measure. Long-term, it gets harder. Some of the work that I didn't talk about here on radiation therapy planning, initially, what we were able to do is use our experience base to reduce the radiation to surrounding critical structures and speed up the radiation therapy planning process. But in the end, what you want to optimize is outcome, and that becomes much harder. And training, surgical training. There's a lot of knowledge, and I talk to the surgeons here in your heads, your residents who may be here, you're gaining that knowledge. And we need better ways of training and coaching and throughout the procedure. So having said that, I've used this as the final slide in talks for 30 years. Um, I got into this field rather because it seemed to me to be a chance that this three-way partnership could make a real difference in patient care. And as I see it evolving, we have to we do are able to use this partnership to do things that we can't do otherwise, and they better be important enough so that it is economically justified. Increasing consistency of care and quality of care, something we all need to do. And the real bottom line is better outcomes and cost-effective treatments. So having said that, I'm done. If there's time, I'd be happy to take some questions. Oh, okay. Okay, a question there.
First question is from a non-surgeon.
Okay.
It looks like you're still having fun at your stage in your career, which is very exciting. Two quick questions. The first one is the camera is looking at what's happening, but in the operating room, there are many things being detected.
Yes.
How does all that other information that's going on with the patient, maybe movement, heart flow, etc., go in and then tell the robot, for example, stop before something happens, or if the robot says, you know what, there's a better way of doing this, and it then so it's really integrating the information in the operating room and artificial intelligence into making it work better.
Okay, let me take there are two questions there. First, how do you know what's going on in the room? And that's the goal of equipping every OR with many cameras that can see lots of things and to also grab every electronic signal and audio signal we can. Now, what you do with that huge massive data, uh, that's sensory input. You need ways in real time to process at least relevant bits of it to, if you're going to have something online, and then also ways of curating that data and using it offline to improve processes. One thing you kind of get for free here is a flight data recorder. You should be able to play back a lot of this. And so, if, let's say you get an infection, then what was different about this procedure than from some other procedure? Was there a difference in the way we set up the room? Was and so in the sort of so that flight data we can fly on airplanes safely because of flight data recorders, and there are these M&M conferences that I'm sure all the surgeons here are familiar with, that being able to know what went on can help you improve things. But the basic other questions of I don't think any of the surgeons in here would like the robot to tap them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, Clem, you're doing it wrong." Uh,
That might happen with AI. It might that feedback might happen in the long term. Maybe
well, we
not.
have to make sure it doesn't. I mean, ultimately, at least the kind of systems I'm contemplating are not going to do that.
Okay, I'll give you an easier question. Last one. What about a 15-year-old kid that is unbelievable at gaming, is incredible haptics, is never going to get into medical school, and would be absolutely unbelievable at using a robot? Where's the place for someone like that? Because the medical school system isn't going to allow them to take part. So do you envisage a time where the robot is actually going to do most of the work? The surgeon might be in the background. I'm not trying to get rid of the surgeons, otherwise I won't get out of this room. But there's a role for someone who's technically gifted like that.
Well, you're talking about, well, first, that person should probably go to engineering school. And I'd love to have him in my as one of my undergrads. But I think there are policy questions there that we're interested in, but I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer the questions of how you structure admissions and programs in medical education. Um, I think there are potentials for the technology to improve education, but you're talking about technical skills. The robot can easily enhance technical skills. It's the judgmental skills that are much harder. And what we're after is a coupling of machine technical capabilities and human judgment to improve a process. If the machine can do a piece of that process better than a human, well, get it to that point and say, robot, hey, do your thing, and it'll do its thing and stop, and then you go back, or you can share the control. But I think that the we're going to see an evolutionary process, and I believe that it will it'll be a very long time before someone walks in, lies down on the table, gets wheeled into the operating room, and the robot just goes and does takes out a gallbladder. I think that some of the work on learning how to do these steps, the payoff is in developing some of the technology that you can use to do things that are immediately useful. And then gradually you build up a base of those and they get better. It's personal opinion, but that's great. Others? Yeah. Are these little microphones here that people can push? I don't know if they're enabled. Okay, so what's your question?
So first of all, I want to say thanks for the really great talk. My question is maybe more philosophical, but I guess we've seen it with autonomous cars
Uh huh.
that when we start to relinquish control, that people kind of stop paying attention.
Uh,
And so when something does go wrong and the car doesn't understand and stops reacting, the human doesn't have enough, they're not engaged enough to intervene.
yeah.
How do we factor that into
Oh,
surgical
that's
systems?
training. And well, I actually my car does watch me and say, "Hey, you're not paying attention." Um, but I that's a real problem. If we come to and even saying just simply computer aided diagnosis, on the one hand, you want to have you don't want ever. We're talking about putting make top to bottom restructuring of the emergency room. And one of the things is if you get someone coming in, you don't want to say this person is okay when they're really sick. So you want really high sensitivity. At the same time, you don't want too many false alarms. At the same time, the other way around is also a problem that the computer says A, B, and C really need care right away, and you miss someone, then that person dies, and that's so it is just a human problem that we're going to have to deal with. I'm not quite sure how. We can make our systems more and more reliable, but I think it'll be a very long time before we can solve that, and it's got to come some combination of we have to deal with the human in the system, and we have to understand more what the human is doing, and maybe in the scenario somehow not get the human to rely so much on the equipment that you lose judgment. And I wish there's a better answer. I mean, often when we even were talking about the robots we had, well, even with that first hip replacement robot, one of the things was, well, what happens if the machine has a failure in the procedure? Is there a way that we can revert to previous practice, get the robot out of there and finish things manually? And there is. But what happens when the surgeons no longer have sort of the basic training if you have to back out? Well, you can try to make the system very reliable. There are airplanes that cannot be flown without their computer. But I wish there was a better answer. These are great philosophical questions, and there's some of the things that I think we need as engineers to think more about. And I had some great conversations at Hopkins along these lines. And it's not true only for surgical robots. It's also true very broadly for these AI systems. Yeah. Okay. One of you all. You can fight for the microphone. I'll leave it. Uh, okay.
First off, thank you for such an incredible talk. My question for you is kind of an add on to something you already mentioned. What happens if something does go wrong? I know that, when I'm using my phone or computer, um, it'll do something crazy that I'm not planning for half the time. what happens if something like that happens in the middle of a surgery? Is there like a fail safe where the robot just stops, or will it turn into some sort of robot massacre? If you know
No,
what I mean.
you want to be sure that it never runs amok. That's one of the things in regulatory. There's a very good reason why there's strict regulation on medical devices and on surgical systems. And I I did not join the company that commercialized that surgical robot, that first robot, or even the one that commercialized that head and neck robot. Uh, but I was giving them a lot of advice at IBM Research. We gave them a lot of research support. And one of the things that really impressed me was as they got closer and closer to the first human case, or even previously that, I got first close to the animal case, which is the family pet. Um, the people became more and more and more paranoid about what could go wrong, what could go wrong. And part of what you do as part of the regulatory process for a safety critical system is something called a failure modes and effects analysis. And what could go wrong? What would the effect be? Can I detect it? If I detect it, what can I do? And that's part of the design of a good system. As a good engineer, but where you've got someone's life or health on the line, you have to be even more careful. I'm sorry, that's preaching, but that's all we can do. Okay, there was a question here.
Yes, thanks for the presentations. So my question is, I think when you are designing a robotic system, you start from a specific clinical problems and design the system accordingly to solve that problem. I think there's another mindset is that centering humanoid robotics, it highlights the skills that one robotic system and they can solve every problem that a human are capable of. So I'm just wondering, like, I think two different mindsets. One is bottom up, one is top down. Which one would you be more appreciated?
How about middle out? Uh, I think it really depends. It's relatively easy if you have a very discrete problem, very, very discrete, to develop a piece of technology that will address that problem. And people out there, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur in the medical device industry, that's the easiest thing to do. Um, and it depends on whether the thing you've invented, the economic value is enough and the clinical benefit is enough for people to buy your system. I think trying to make something that can do all procedures is too much at the other end. The Da Vinci robots, I think, are a good example of something. It's a little at the higher end of that, but the idea was they had a driving system concept to solve the problem of you can't get inside the patient without cutting the patient open. And the original thought of people for those systems was it'd be great for cardiac surgery. That's what everyone talked about. Turned out that the breakthrough application turned out to be prostatectomies, nerve-sparing prostatectomies, which it was interesting that Pat Walsh, who I'm sure you know, didn't much like them until I ran into him after he retired and we were talking. And he had kind of come around at that point, but still, there was driven by strong patient demand and provided a real capability. It proved to be fairly versatile and easily customized for new applications because it was easy to add new tools. That steady hand robot is designed for very precise tool manipulation in an interactive environment where you really want to be right there with the patient, either looking at an exoscope or a microscope or something with an endoscope. And there's a set of applications, and we use a few of those to motivate what we're doing. For instance, for transsphenoidal surgery, we want to get in through the sphenoid, and there are a bunch of problems to do that and very reliably and to get very good information. But if that was all you were going to do, there wouldn't be much economic justification. But as a way of getting what you like to do is use a specific problem to help you develop a more general capability, and that's sort of what we do. And I could be wrong. I think the original indication for the Da Vinci robots was general laparoscopic surgery. I can't remember, but that's sort of what I think for these more complex systems. For me, the robot is sort of, it's like a printer. It's a device that you can use it to help you do things. The augmented reality is another device. And for me, the thing to do is, do we have a good way of bringing all of these together to develop a human-machine partnership? I got asked actually, there's a workshop tomorrow to discuss it. What would be the moonshot for surgical robots? And I said, or for robots? I said, well, in the medical space, it would probably be a whole family of technology that let you put together any application in a period from 2 hours to 2 weeks. For the other thought there would be a robot nurse or nurse's aide. That was that slide. But that's sort of, it's a very, very good philosophical question, and I've been pontificating. Other questions? Yeah. Hey, Dave. Yeah, well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really, really impressed with everything I've seen. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Well, better than 2 millimeters. Yeah. 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 Oh, you're talking about the entire uncertainty chain, and it's real. The surgical navigation systems are actually worse because they typically, you have some thing you're tracking here, and you have some tool out here, and you think you know where that is, and the root mean square accuracy might be out here, might be quarter millimeter, but that's, you need sort of 3 times that to have a low probability of error, and it's all multiplied out here. So it's a real problem. For me, part of the problem is you have a very long kinematic chain and another one here, and you're subtracting the accuracy, because what I really care about is the relation of this to that. And so I believe that part of the solution is, in fact, endpoint sensing, direct observation of the tool to tissue relationship, and try to close your loop around that whenever you can. As a surgeon, I'm sure that's what you did. You are not a stereotactic device. Well, maybe you are, but yeah, and ultimately with the others, there the idea is, can we use computer vision and other sensors to directly measure tool to tissue relationships that we care about. The other thing is, with the robot, is actually can be more precise than one of these navigational tracking systems. if it's properly calibrated. And so one of the other thoughts we have is that if we know the self motion quite accurately of say an endoscopic camera, we can use a lot motion stereo techniques to do, we think, to get a very accurate reconstruction. And this is one of the things we're working on. Get reconstruction errors down to a millimeter, which is even with very small voxel cone beam CT or whatever, is probably something a little better than a millimeter is what you probably want to rely on, which is still a lot better than 3 or 5. So that's the idea. Whether we can succeed, we're making progress in that direction. I hope we get a little further before I have to retire, which I'm not planning to do anytime soon. I can't retire until you do. And you're never going to retire. Okay. So, no, but again, these are terrific questions, all of them. Yeah. Surgeon wins. I ask the surgeons over here. I'm sure the surgeon wins. Now, you want to be sure that you've given information to the surgeon. It's just like an airplane pilot being told, here's the ground collision warning system. The pilot can still win, although maybe the pilot is not being so prudent. But you need, the other thing is, if you're warning a surgeon, you're giving information to a human, you've got to be able to explain your reasoning. And that, I think, is really crucial. Any recommendation, and so, now if it's something is really, really time urgent, like if the robot thinks you've got the tool, the cutting tool about to intersect the aorta, maybe the robot won't go there, and the surgeon could still insist, but it would, so that can be done. But I think it's more a question of, well, let's talk about putting a needle into a vessel, which it could be different sizes. Like you want to get into the vessel where the robot can actually sense when it gets into a blood vessel, you can kind of feel the pop, and you can sense maybe there's blood where there wasn't, but you don't want to go through the other side. That you can do, the robot can do very reliably. Now, I've had a blood draw where the technician actually went through the other side. I had a big bruise. So things like that. So the way I see this working is you have a very reliable little step. Then you can turn that over to the machine if it can do it better than the human. I think there's a lot of benefit to be had on things like robot acting as a retractor or as a very intelligent endoscope holder, things like that. But as we get more and more capabilities, I think what we'll begin to see is more and more of these little steps. Like, well, actually, RoboDoc, that first system we developed, there was one thing we knew the robot could do better than a human with a broach, which was shape the bone to receive the implant. The surgeon still had to be convinced that the robot had aligned itself properly. And there was a lot of checking back and forth, and the surgeon wasn't satisfied. You would push the stop button and say, don't go further. But at that point, the robot as a machine tool was basically, with less violence, preparing a bone to receive an implant and putting it exactly where the surgeon in a planning system had said that implant should go. So the cutting was autonomous, but the judgment was still human. And one of the things that I wanted to pursue that eventually others did was if I've done a whole lot of these procedures and I know where things went and I know what I and there was differences in outcomes, I should be able to use that maybe to modify my choice of implant placement or selection. And Sato has done some of that work, and I've always thought we should have done more.
Sorry, it's me again. It's a public lecture, so I'm pretending that I'm a patient in Kingston, Ontario. I'm looking at these unbelievable techniques that you're developing.
Mhm.
It's going to take a hell of a lot for it to affect me. How does Queens get to be right at the forefront of getting access to this technology for their patients? What are the steps? Is it just through collaboration? Is it through clinical trials? Is it through companies? Because if I'm the patient, I want this done to me rather than the standard
So
procedure.
there are various stages of that. I think for large deployment, you absolutely need a company to commercialize it. Also, companies generally have expertise in some things that academics don't have. Um, but yeah, it's all of the above. I mean, you need to go through a process where you get uh, convince people of safety and potential benefit, and you often do lots of work on either fake, we call them phantom, fake anatomy or animal anatomy or human cadavers. But at some point, you then need to be sure your system is safe and will do what it wants to do. And then you have to convince an institutional review board that the human trial you want to do will be safe and well justified, and that you're explaining to the patient the risks and benefits. So, yeah, I think it's all of the above. It's not just with Queens, it's with any hospital, Toronto, Johns Hopkins. We all have the same set of challenges there. And I think one of the challenges is there's a great rush to take advantage of some of the promises of these very large learning models. And you sometimes there can be, for instance, in cancer detection, some of those systems can outperform a radiologist. So maybe they should be used, but you still have to understand the sensitivity and selectivity and be sure the person using the technology understands the limit. I know that's a motherhood answer, but we all have mothers. I mean, it's true. There's no magic wand other than a place like here at Queens, you have just amazingly strong people.
Maybe my question. How do
He-
they bring it?
Yeah, that I would ask him. I would ask him, how are you going to do this? You want to take a whack?
I don't think I have an answer to that. Maybe John does. But I think the other thing we have to be cautious of the time, and
Okay.
I want to thank Professor Taylor for his great presentation. I want to thank the audience. I'm thrilled we've had such a great turnout, and so I have a small gift I'd like to give,
Okay.
and we'll bring the session
Okay.
to a close.
I hope it's small. It'll go in my suitcase. Otherwise, I can mail.
Yeah, I think it'll fit.
Oh, that okay.
Not too bad. It's not too heavy. So again, I'd like to thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you.
It's been great.
And again, I want to thank the audience and in particular Dr. Bruce.